In this video, we will briefly discuss the evolution of Tibetan democracy in exile and then look closely at the various democratic institutions and how they function. Arriving in India as a refugee following the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1959, His Holiness the Dalai Lama immediately embarked on reforming the exiled Tibetan society. The Central Tibetan Administration (CTA), popularly known as the Tibetan Government in Exile, was set up on the principles of democracy. With a modest beginning, the democratization process gradually and firmly strengthened year after year. Over the years, the Dalai Lama, as the architect of Tibetan democracy, skillfully introduced crucial reforms to democratize Tibetan community in exile. In February 1960, during a huge gathering of Tibetans in Bodh Gaya, India, the Dalai Lama promulgated democracy as a system of governance for Tibet and its community in exile. On 10 October 1961, the Dalai Lama circulated a draft outline for a new democratic constitution amongst the Tibetan diaspora. In 1963, the draft constitution for future Tibet was established and it defined, among others, the three pillars of democracy as well as fundamental rights and duties. In 1991, after a review of the 1963 draft constitution for future Tibet and consultations with Tibetans as well as non-Tibetan experts and scholars, a democratic charter for the Tibetans in exile was promulgated based on the realities of the situation in exile. The charter is the supreme law governing the functions of the CTA. One of the most significant reforms the Dalai Lama initiated occurred in 2011, when he formally and publicly devolved his political authority. In March 2011, Tibetans in exile went to polls to elect a new Kalun Tiba de facto Prime Minister. A year later, the title Kalun Tiba was also changed to Sikyong, which literally means political leader. The Charter of Tibetans in Exile is the supreme law governing the functions of the CTA. Based on the spirit of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter guarantees to all Tibetans equality before the law and enjoyment of rights and freedoms without discrimination on the basis of sex, religion, race, language, and social origin. It provides for a clear separation of power among the three pillars of democracy: judiciary, legislature, and executive. The Tibetan government in exile is firmly based on the three pillars of democracy, thereby ensuring a system of accountability, often referred to as checks and balances. The executive, the Kashak or the cabinet, is the highest executive office of the CTA. It runs and fulfills all the executive and administrative responsibilities of the CTA. In accordance with the Tibetan Charter, the 7 members of the Kashak are headed by a Sikyong. The Sikyong is directly elected by the exiled Tibetan populace. The Sikyong in turn nominates his 7 Kaluns and seeks the parliament's approval. The term of the Kashak is for 5 years. A secretary, cabinet secretary, heads the Kashak secretariat. The secretariat provides the Kashak with the secretarial and administrative services. All the decisions made in the Kashak are implemented through various departments and other offices. There are 7 departments, namely religion and culture, home, finance, education, security, information and international relations, and health. The legislature. The Tibetan Parliament in exile is unicameral and the highest legislative organ of the CTA. It is the sole authority to draft and enact laws which become enforceable after the Sikyong approves and signs them. The parliament consists of 45 members, 10 each from the 3 traditional provinces of Tibet and 2 each from the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism and the traditional Bon religion. 5 members are elected by the Tibetan diaspora in the West, 2 from Europe, 2 from North and South America, and 1 from Australia and Asia, excluding India, Nepal, and Bhutan. The Tibetan Parliament in exile is headed by a speaker and a deputy speaker, elected by members amongst themselves. Sessions of the parliament are held twice every year in March and September. When the parliament is not in session, there is a standing committee of 11 members. The members of the parliament undertake periodic tours to Tibetan settlements to make an assessment of people's overall conditions. On their return, they bring to the notice of the administration about all the grievances and matters which need attention. The judiciary. The Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission is the CTA's apex judicial body, empowered to establish any subordinate justice commissions or to dissolve any of them already in existence. It is responsible for adjudicating all civil disputes in the exiled Tibetan community but does not entertain any suit seen to be in contravention of the laws of the host country. It also lacks the jurisdiction to handle criminal suits. The Commission is composed of a Chief Justice Commissioner and 2 Justice Commissioners. The Chief Justice Commissioner chairs the Commissioner's sittings and adjudications. However, while adjudicating suits, the Commissioners exercise equal power. The Chief Justice Commissioner has the dual role of being the administrative head of the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission. Tibetan non-governmental organizations and media organizations play an important role in the democratic system. The Tibetan Women's Association was re-established in 1984 in India. It was initially founded on 12 March 1959 in Tibet as a resistance movement against the illegal occupation of Tibet by Communist China. Its main objectives are to raise public awareness of the abuses faced by Tibetan women in Tibet through publicity and involvement in national and international affairs. It also serves the Tibetan community in exile to address religious and cultural issues, educational needs, social welfare, environment and political participation, and social empowerment of women. It has over 20,000 members and 58 branches worldwide. Tibetan Youth Congress was founded in 1970 by Tibetan youth based in exile in India. Its objectives include promotion and protection of national unity and integrity, preservation and promotion of Tibetan culture and traditions, and the restoration of independence of Tibet. It organizes cultural exhibitions and festivals to create awareness about Tibetan culture and tradition. It engages in a wide variety of activities aimed at elevating the most urgent social and educational problems such as conducting health education programs, holding adult education classes, and environmental campaigns. Guchusum is an organization formed by the former political prisoners of Tibet in 1991. Its mission is to promote recognition and respect for the fundamental rights of Tibetans and strengthen the Tibetan freedom movement through research, advocacy, and service of the Tibetan prisoners of conscience. It also works to provide a platform of self-reliance with solidarity and unity amongst former Tibetan political prisoners and their families. National Democratic Party of Tibet, NDPT, was founded in 1994. Its main aim and objectives are to prepare for the establishment of the political parties in the future Tibet, promote democracy, educate the Tibetan people about the significance of political parties, and create awareness about Tibetan issues. Founded in 1997, La Charitable Trust is a social work institute based in Dharamsala, India. It aims to help Tibetans survive and prosper in exile while preserving Tibetan culture. It also offers volunteers and students the opportunity to engage in meaningful community service and social work. Students for Free Tibet India is a chapter-based network of young people and activists around the world. They work to campaign for Tibetans' fundamental right to political freedom through education, grassroots organizing, and non-violent direct action. It is one of the many chapters of the Students for Free Tibet, founded in New York City in 1994, dedicated to the promotion of peace and non-violence. It provides a comprehensive educational program for the Tibetan community that increases and strengthens the message of nonviolence as the appropriate path to the Tibetan struggle. Tibetan Center for Conflict Resolution is a non-profit educational organization dedicated to nonviolent management of conflicts in the Tibetan community and the world as a whole. Founded in 2001, its objective is to promote and develop the approaches and tools of nonviolent conflict resolution and democratic processes in the Tibetan community and other cultural communities. Active Nonviolence Education Center, founded on 10 September 2007, is a non-profit educational organization dedicated to the promotion of peace and nonviolence. It provides a comprehensive educational program for the Tibetan community that increases and strengthens the message of nonviolence as the appropriate path for the Tibetan struggle. Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy is the first Tibetan non-governmental human rights organization established in exile in January 1996. The center conducts regular, systematic investigations of human rights abuses in Tibet and publishes reports, testimonies, and briefings on human rights issues inside Tibet. It also empowers human rights advocates by providing resources, training, and other capacity-building programs in the Tibetan community in exile. To facilitate free, fair, and accurate delivery of information on activities of the Tibetan community both inside and outside Tibet, there are various media houses established in exile, mostly covering the news in Tibetan language. They include The Voice of Tibet, Tibet Times, Tibet Express, Tibet Review, Payul, Tibet Post International, Voice of America Tibetan Service, and Radio Free Asia Tibetan Service.